Welcome back. The U.S. House of Representatives has given its support for the renewal of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, otherwise known as AGOA. It provides African markets with duty-free access to American markets or the U.S. market, and has been utilized by countries including South Africa in the automobile and product export spaces. Approximately 22% of South African exports to the United States benefit from AGOA. That's resulted in billions of dollars in revenue. Estimates suggest that 500,000 jobs in South Africa are dependent on AGOA. For more on this, let's speak to political economist Dr. Lebohang Pheko. A very good evening to you. Great to have you on SABC News. So, is it fair to assume that South Africa will continue to benefit from an extension of AGOA, given that there were threats not too long ago from the Trump administration to have us removed altogether?
It's hard to tell, actually, Tamagila. It's hard to tell because even though the vote was overwhelmingly in favor of maintaining the AGOA bill to most African countries, bear in mind that this is not a bilateral agreement. It's entirely unilateral. So it's at the discretion of the U.S. government and at the U.S. administration. And they do have a history of excluding different countries based on their own interests, their own national interests, their own economic interests, and their opposition to different countries, perhaps military or governance principles, although certainly the U.S. is no reputational benchmark for anybody, but be that as it may, we should bear in mind that it's not a bilateral agreement, so it is entirely at their discretion.
Given that context, then, is cutting South Africa out of the arrangement something that the U.S. can afford to do when you consider that about 22% of the exports that we send over actually benefit from the particular arrangement?
So, I mean, the value of these imports, to the U.S. imports under AGOA, I think in 2022 was about $10 billion US. The value of South Africa's export in the last couple of years was about $3.2 billion US. And also bearing in mind that the U.S. market itself is severely hampered at the moment. There has been a bit of an upsurge, but it's not entirely clear what that upsurge is about. But certainly the tariffs and the tariff transfer in year have played an important role in escalating the cost of living in the United States. It really putting it on their own manufacturing sector. Their cost of imports has increased quite considerably, and the dollar is of course quite sluggish against currencies like the South African rand at the moment. And I think it's important to situate ourselves not only as mere recipients of U.S. largesse, but as important players ourselves. They also have, of course, the whole world at their disposal. So do we have the BRICS at our disposal as an association. We have the African Union at our disposal. I think at the beginning of this, I was among many people who were talking about the need for us to think a bit more imaginatively and think away from the U.S. and center, as important as it is, but not the only important economy in the world.
But has South Africa done it enough, I wonder, to try and keep its spot within the AGOA framework?
I mean, what does that actually look like? So, one would have to ask, what does that actually look like? In terms of our spot, we took the trouble of getting on a plane and taking quite an important delegation of people to the White House to be, frankly, flagellated by the United States president for the world to see. But I think that was an important moment of very difficult diplomacy for the president and for our country. So beyond that and beyond, maintaining our own sovereignty. And I think this is where it comes to, this is the crux of it. Are we willing to maintain our own sovereignty, to maintain the principle that your enemies are not my enemies and that your friends do not have to be my friends? Right. Are we willing to understand that in the context of international relations, all sovereignties are equal? And in fact, that we have the right in international law to frame what that looks like for ourselves. So it's hard to tell.
I think we've lost Dr. Lebohang Pheko, who was speaking to us about the confirmation in the early hours of this morning, in fact, that the House of Representatives in the United States had chosen to support the extension of AGOA for at least another 3 years. We don't yet know what shape the arrangement will take once it's all been finalized through the various US processes and whether South Africa will remain part of AGOA. But once again, that was Dr. Lebohang Pheko helping us make sense of where things stand at the moment.